So welcome to, I think it's lecture number 6 of Mesilat Yesharim. We are in chapter 4, and I know everyone is using a different version of Mesilat Yesharim. So, I mean, different translations, different printings. So I can't give you page numbers, but we're in the middle of chapter 4. If you remember, chapter 4, he said he's going to tell us 3 different strategies, 3 different groups of people that have different strategies as to how to acquire the trait of zihirut, which I've been translating as vigilance. Some of the translations call it watchfulness. The first 2 groups were, which were discussed last lecture. One is the group of people, the highest level, the people that have true shlema, true completeness and wholeness, are those that are motivated to be vigilant because they understand that it's important, simply because they realize and recognize the inherent importance of it, not for any other motivation other than that they know that it's important. The second group are those that the next level are doing it out of honor. They want to be honored by the people. They want to feel good about their position in society. They want people to look at them and realize that they're doing a good thing. So it obviously the motivation isn't quite as good, but it still can be used as a motivator. Sometimes you decide to do the right thing because of how it's going to look, which is okay. It's not as good as doing it because it's the right thing, but it's better than nothing. It's a way. The third group is the lowest level, and he's going to spend, and that's what we're about to read. So in the Hebrew, which should be the same for all of us, the words are ach he'ara l'chol hehamon. So it's approximately halfway through the chapter. The English reads, but for the general public, or for the whole community, or for the majority of people, are on the third level, and for them, they're looking for, their motivations are the lowest level, but it's still an important motivation. Now, one of the things that I've learned that I didn't necessarily notice the first few times in my life when I learned Mesilat Yesharim was the similarity, and it almost seems strange to say this before you really learn through it, because I can't help but draw similarities to Rambam and Maimonides because I teach that on Wednesday nights, and I've been doing that for years. But one of the things that it's now that I read it, I can't help but see it. And the Rambam very often talks about the real reason why we do things, and then the general public, what motivates them. And what he's writing here is so familiar to anyone that studies Rambam that it's impossible not to see the parallel. So what we're about to learn, so what does the general public think, right? And what motivates them to achieve zihirut, to be vigilant, to be careful meaning to live the right kind of life. Now remember, no matter which category you're in, his first sentence started was, you have to learn, right? No matter what path, what's going to motivate you to choose the right path in life, right? The bottom line is that you have to learn, you have to study, you have to know what the right things are to do. And that's crucial no matter what. So I'm just putting that out there to keep that in mind as we learn through this. So, however, the motivation for most people, for the general public, for the usual people, right? That is the topic of schar v'onesh, which means punishment and reward, right? Most people are motivated by being worried that if I do the wrong thing, something bad's going to happen. And if I do the right thing, I'll get rewarded. Now, remember, this isn't what he thinks is the ideal. This isn't what we should be striving for, but this is the way most people are. So he's going to focus on that idea. Birot omek hadin ad heichon magia. When a person sees the depth of judgment, of God's judgment, how deeply it reaches. That the world runs in such a way that every single thing we do matters. Our positive things have positive consequences. Our negative things have negative consequences. So we have to be very careful in everything we do. But we should always be afraid and shaking and nervous and trembling. Who can stand on the day of judgment? you can imagine this, as we taught sometimes to imagine ourselves on the high holidays, for example, imagine ourselves standing in judgment before a great judge that knows everything about our behavior. And if we think about that all the time, we would shake. Who can be justified for how he lives his life in front of his creator? God's vision, his sight, his knowledge extends to everything, large and small. Right? God knows our speech. He knows our conversations. Even simple, mundane conversations that happen in our homes between man and wife. Many people understand this. You can understand this in two ways, right? One is to say this. I'm actually not explaining so much the Mesilat Yesharim, but that statement of Chazal, that statement of the rabbis, that the conversations that go on in our house is mundane and it's little, and God even knows that. But it is another way to look at it, actually, that flips it totally on its head, and that is that God is that which we think of as light and simple and meaningless conversation in our own homes between family members is actually what is most important before God. But this is just a different way of reading that Chazal, both being valid in their own level. But Od Amru, they also said, "Usivivav nisarama od." This is a famous thing, that those that are close to God, God is very careful with them. He's careful and to the width of a hair. In others, he measures out our behavior and is careful in the way he judges us. And now he's going to give a bunch of examples of figures, mostly figures in the Bible, figures in the Torah, who even though they're the examples of their supposed or small missteps or mistakes or errors, or maybe even minor sins, turned out that God punished them in a big way, had major effects. And again, you can look at this in two ways. You can look at it as where God is very careful with you and exacting, and will punish you even really big for a small thing, which is kind of scary. Or rather, you can look at it as even the small things that we do can have very major ramifications. The little tiny things, whether they're good or having good ramifications or bad, having unfortunately bad ones, we can make a minor misstep, do something small for selfish reasons, but when the one thing causes another, the end up could be terrible. So one of the first example is Avraham, Ahov Lakona. We're talking about Abraham, who was beloved by his maker. To the extent that it was written about him, Avraham o Avi, my beloved Abraham. Lo palat min hadin mipnei dvarim kalim shelo dikdek b'hem. He did not escape judgment even for the small things that he wasn't careful about, when he made small mistakes. Al she'amar bomei dakir shena. So, for example, when he said, "How will I know?" When God made him a promise that he will one day, his descendants will inherit the land of Israel, he said, "Well, how will I know?" Like, he made a demand of God. It's a minor issue. You can understand that in a negative way, but it certainly doesn't seem like anything major. And God's response is, you should know that one day your children will go into exile. In other words, there will be a long delay and a lot will happen, right? Because of your doubts of me. Or he made a deal with Abimelech, who was the king of the Philistines. He made a peace deal with him without consulting God, without thinking who he's making a deal with and what the future consequences of such a deal would be. God said to him, it'll be at least 7 generations before your descendants will return to the land and have that happiness of finally living in their homeland. So the point being that small things have big ramifications, right? Yaakov, we know al shechora apo berachel, when he got angry at his wife Rachel, who said to him hava libanim, she was very distraught over her infertility, and she said, "Give me children." She was angry, she was upset, she was sad, frustrated, and his answer was very curt, So Amru Medrash, the rabbis taught us that is this how you answer someone who is in distress? You answer patiently, kindly, with a soft heart, with empathy, right? You don't answer, and get angry at them. So therefore, that your children will stand before her children, and so on, that he would receive a punishment later on. And then it's kind of a legend. It's a medrash. It's not necessarily reported in the Torah, but there's a story that when Jacob and was meeting his brother Esau, he was afraid that Esau would want to take his daughter Dinah, who was then a young girl, and he put her in a box, right? So his intent was good, because he kept her away from his brother and put her in this box. So the Medrash says, right? You did not want her to marry into your family. Sorry, so she's going to end up marrying outside, and she ended up with the whole story of Shechem and the rape of Shechem and so on and so forth. The whole story. The bottom line being that a small thing, which was even meant for good reason, at least Jacob thought it was, turned out to have major ramifications. And he's going to bring two more examples. Yosef, when he was in the jail, right, when he was in the dungeon, and he said to the Sar HaMashkim, that is the guy who was in charge of, the officer in charge of the drinks, who he was in jail with him, he said, Ki im zachartani itcha, that you should remember me with you, as opposed to saying God, right? In other words, he was having his faith in a person rather than faith in God. For that small thing, which is almost an understandable mistake. It's a mistake, but it's a small one. He was punished with 2 extra years in jail, as the rabbis teach us. Yosef himself, who embalmed his father, which doesn't really correspond well with Jewish custom and law, so since he embalmed his father without God's permission, right, or because he heard his brothers say, our father, your servant, and without objecting and saying, no, my father is not my servant, my father is my father, and he was quiet. So again, the slight bit of arrogance, that's why he died younger than his brothers, even though he was much younger than his older brothers. So again, small little mistakes have very big ramifications. And again, we could think of this in 2 ways. We could think of it in a kind of simplistic level as a punishment for a sin way. If you think of God in an anthropomorphic way, as coming after you, like, I do a little thing, but he can give me a big smack in the face. But we can also think of it in a less anthropomorphic way, in a way that I think we all experience in our lives. And that is, we can all probably think back to a time when we just said the wrong thing at the wrong time, probably because we didn't think right. We were angry, we were upset, we were jealous, we were going through puberty, right? Right, for whatever reason, and ultimately it had big ramifications. Somebody got really upset with us. We might have broken a relationship when we shouldn't have. We might, in moments of weakness, we do little things, and then the same thing goes the other way. We can all probably think of examples when we did something good. When all we did was take one extra step. We were a little too lazy. We weren't really in the mood, but we said, you know what? I'll stay the extra hour at work. I'll stay the extra hour to help somebody do something. And it had tremendous amount of good effect in the end. So we see this in our own lives all the time. And David, we see with his last example, because he didn't respect Torah and he called it songs, right? He ended up getting punished with the story that happened with Uzzah. Uzzah was the one who inadvertently touched the ark when he wasn't supposed to and died. And his joyous time when he was celebrating the arrival of the ark in Jerusalem, it ended up being a tragic day instead of a happy day. And Michal, his wife, that was Shaul's daughter, who was David's wife, Michal, because she rebuked him and criticized him because he was dancing in a way that she interpreted as being not respectful for a king. Nensha, she was punished that she didn't have any children until she had one that she passed away in childbirth. Chizkiyahu, and we see Hezekiah, the king, who was also a righteous king, but in the end, because he showed off his in a very haughty way, he showed off the treasures of his house, of his palace, to the officers of the king of Babylon who came as a delegation. Nigzar al banav liosarisim. It was decreed that his children would be servants. Vehechal Beit Melech Babel, in the house or in the palace of the king of Babylon years later. There's many examples of great people who made what seems to be relatively small mistakes that had terrible, terrible ramifications. The example of Chizkiyahu, the last one that he gave, is a very fascinating one, and I spend a lot of time thinking about that one. And it's, after Chizkiyahu, after Hezekiah had two really miraculous salvations, one from his own personal illness, and the other one where the city of Jerusalem was under siege from what was then the most powerful empire in the Middle East, the Assyrian Empire. And after that, he had that arrogance to show off as if it was his own wealth and his own greatness when the king of Babylon sent messengers to him, and it was such a downer. It was the moment when Yeshayahu, Isaiah, the prophet, who was the prophet at the time, saw that Chizkiyahu was not who he hoped he was. Hezekiah was thought by Isaiah for so many years to be the Messiah. He was calling him Mashiach. He was going to be the salvation, the ultimate salvation. But that little bit of arrogance that shone through at just the wrong time was basically what stole, really, in the rabbinic tradition, that could have been the moment of salvation, but a human being was a little bit too arrogant, and we went down in the wrong direction. And that's, unfortunately, usually it's arrogance that ruins everything. So, and it continues on, Ubeperek Ein Darshan, in the chapter of Ein Darshan, which is in the tractate Chagiga in the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan, when he would reach this verse, he would cry. The verse says in Malachi, in the book of Malachi or Malachi, I will come near to you in judgment, and I will be a quick witness against you. And those that are magic makers or sorcerers, those that menafim, or those that are adulterers, and those that swear falsely, and those that withhold proper wages from their workers, almana, and those and withhold proper wages and don't treat properly a widow, a yasom, or mate ager, and those that trick a ger, either a convert or really means a stranger or a migrant, someone from somewhere else. So the point being, it's a long list of things, all of which have different levels of severity. They're all bad stuff, but I mean, the difference between one and the other is dramatic. Exactly what you think is bad, I'm not going to go through, but there's a list of things, right? And he said, so what Rabbi Yochanan was crying about was that all of everything from the worst to the not so bad, they're all considered when God does his judgment. A servant who is being measured not just for his severe transgressions, but even his mild transgressions, God is still judging him. How is there any way of getting out of this? Right? So he would cry, it doesn't mean that the same punishment goes to each crime. Obviously, the punishment will fit the crime. God pays us back appropriately, measure for measure. The purpose is that when it comes down to measuring our actions, all of them are measured. The light ones all together are in the scale together with the severe ones. Don't think that, if you do really bad stuff, then God won't bother you about the little stuff. It doesn't work that way. He's not going to ignore the little things because of the big things. Kind of reminds me a little of when a guy's a mass murderer, someone, an awful criminal, goes in front of the judge and he gets 10 life sentences for the 5 murders he committed and the couple other terrible things. And then he also gets tacked on, a charge for fourth degree, running a red light while he was running, like little things, but they tack them all on. They're all in there, even though, who cares? The guy is going to sit in jail for the next 170 years, but he's also going to sit an extra week because he whatever, he said something bad to the cop or something. Who knows? But but the point is, though, when it comes to judging our lives in front of God, it doesn't work that way, and the truth is we don't really know the measurement of what we do. We might think it's mild, but when you insult somebody and you don't know what they're going through at that time, you don't know what their day is like, and you don't know, if you insult them, what kind of memories that brings up in their heart and so on. You could be doing something really terrible and you think it's mild. So God looks at everything all at once, to judge everything, and everything has its consequences. Everything has a punishment. On each thing according to how severe it is. And this is what Solomon says in the book Kohelet in Ecclesiastes. I'll call Nelam Tovim Ra. On all things, God comes and judges, on all actions. Right? Just like God also does not stop from rewarding us on every good action that we do. Even the smallest things will be rewarded. And in order to disabuse those that think that they're ready to be convinced and assume and think that our master, may he be blessed, doesn't care bedinav in his judgment on mild things and minor things, and doesn't bother accounting for them. Rather, therefore the rabbis taught us this rule. Anyone who says that God doesn't care, he doesn't mind, who thinks, forgive me on this one, yivatru me'ohi, may his, literally means may his entrails, may his guts become loosened. It's pretty strong. If your evil inclination says, go ahead and sin, it's okay, God will forgive you, don't listen to him, because that's not an approach. If you know something's wrong, don't do it. I do, but you can hear probably in the way I'm teaching this is that in my life, when I read this the first time, I was probably about 15 or 14 years old, right? So at the time, I was thinking of God as almost in an anthropomorphic way, and I'm thinking of getting punished for the things that I do, of God like looking at me literally with a scale. As I've grown in life, and as I've learned more and experienced more, I'm sure that many of us have similar feelings. It's not really so much that that God is doing this on a scale, right? This is the way the world works, right? The little things that we do, whether they're good or bad, have big ramifications. There's nothing that we do, right? And this should scare us into being careful. That's what we're trying to learn how to do, is be careful. Be careful, because when we think it's meaningless, that's like saying HaKadosh Baruch Hu Vatranu. We think what we do is nothing. We think nobody cares. We think it's not going to affect anyone, but it can, and it does. We think that if I don't bother today to go and do what I was supposed to do, if I don't bother or if I don't really pay attention to what the other person is feeling like, we think it's minor, we think it's small, but it's not. And that's the way the world works. It's scary, and it is scary, and we should be scared. And that's what he's trying to do here, is scare us into. That's what he's doing. I mean, it might not be what a modern psychologist would do, but scare us into being vigilant, into doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing. I see you don't like that. I'm sorry. but and also remember, this might help make it a little bit better. This is the third way, right? The first way is to do it because it's right, right? That's what that's the Shlei Hadas. Remember, that's how he started. Not because you're scared, but because it's the right thing to do. The second way is think about how it would appear to others, which is not a great way, but it's a little bit better than thinking about the terrible ramifications or the great ramifications of doing the right thing versus the wrong thing. right? So, but if this is what motivates you, then fine. And he says, unfortunately, for most people, this is what motivates them, right? Most people don't do the right thing because it's right. They do the right thing because they think it'll help them, and they don't do the wrong thing because they're worried about the potential negative effects. This is something simple and clear. God is a truthful God. This is what Moses said. Hatzur tamim ba'alo. God is the rock. He's solid. Whatever he does is perfect. Mishpat. All of his ways are judgment. El emunah. He is a faithful God. Ve'ein avel. There is nothing wrong or twisted in what he does. Tzaddik v'yasharhu. He is just and righteous. Because God desires true justice. That is why he is willing. I don't know how I'm trying to translate this. Overlooking merit is as much a transgression of justice as is overlooking liability, right? Right. In other words, it's just as bad for God to ignore the good things as it is to ignore the bad things. Al Kain, therefore, in Mishpatu Rotzeh, what his desire is for true justice, then God has to run the world in such a way that each person gets his due. Now, he's not entering into the question here of theodicy, why we don't see this in our daily lives and so on. It's not in the scope of what we're studying now. Obviously, it's an important subject, but that's not really the topic of today, right? So bein latov, bein lemutav, whether it's good or bad, right? V'hainu el emunah ve'navel tzaddik v'yoshu. That's what it means when it says that he's a God of emunah, a God of trust or of faith, and there's nothing wrong or twisted. Tzaddik v'yasher, he is just and righteous. Shepershu zechron levracha, that Chazal, that the rabbis explain, la tzaddikim v'lo rishonim. What that means is he is just and righteous both to righteous people and to wicked people. Kikachi amida, this is the proper way, right? The proper measure. V'al hakol hu done, he judges everything. V'al kol chetu manish ve'en limalet. There's no way to get away from it. If you do something bad, there is negative consequences, and that's just the way it is. Vim Tomar, and if you're going to say, well, we know that God is also Rachmem, he's also just, he's also nice, he's also full of mercy. So how do the two things work together? So Lama Imayemeretz, if we're going to get punished for everything like this, then what does it mean that he has mercy, right? So Kivan Shal Kopanim, and again, this can be looked at in a less, what I believe is a less mature way. God is sitting there deciding, am I patient now, or do I give him a smack right now, right? Or you can look at it as the way the world actually works, right? Right? And the way the world actually works, he's about to say, I'll give a tiny spoiler, is that when we do something bad, the negative consequences don't necessarily slap us in the face that minute, right? The consequences, there's time for those consequences to happen, right? That's the way the world is constructed. And that's part of God's trait, so to speak, of mercy, right? Because there may be time to try to fix something. There may be time before the bad things happen. You might be able to apologize. You might be able to find out what you did. You might be able to express regret and fix something. Like, it doesn't work that way. Why is it that when we do something wrong, we don't get hit by lightning, right? I'm sure people have asked you that. Right away, bang, done, finished. Well, because the world wasn't made that way, because we need to have a chance, right? God knows we're going to make mistakes, which he's going to say in a minute. We all will make mistakes. So that aspect of mercy in the world is the fact that things don't happen right away. The punishments don't come falling from heaven that second. And so Vim Tomar and Kain Midas Arachim Lama Hiomedes. What does it mean that God has mercy? Kim Shal Kapanim Tzarach Ladaktik Badino Koldover. In the end, he has to everything can't be overlooked. He has to give you a just punishment for every misdeed. So Atshuva, the answer is Vaday Midas Arachim Mikuma Shalom. This trait of mercy is what keeps the world running. Right? It would never last. The world would never last, right? If not for that. Right? Right? In other words, even though there is judgment for what we do, the midas hadin, God's judgment side, right, doesn't just slap you right away. If you were going to go according to absolute justice, mamish, then it should be that you do a sin, you get punished immediately. Without waiting, immediately when you sin. And the punishment should be a punishment with anger. It's literally a strike of lightning. You're going against the will of God himself, right? There should be no opportunity to fix it, right? How can you fix it? You can't change the past. You did it. It's done. The deed is done, right? So that's how the world should work. The sin is already done. If you go ahead and you, God forbid, somebody kills someone else, or you commit adultery. So how can you take the act away? It was done. It's over, right? Can you make it suddenly that it doesn't exist anymore? It doesn't work. However, the attribute of mercy, right? The way the world works also has the attribute of mercy. Yes, it's true that what goes around comes around, and there's negative consequences to the negative things we do, and positive consequences to the positive things we do. But the world continues to roll on, right? He hanosenes hefech hashlosha dvarim shezacharnu, right? Right? The attribute of mercy comes and argues the following three things, right? Sheyutan zman lachote. Number one, it gives time. It doesn't happen right away, right? So it gives time for a sinner to repent. He doesn't get slammed right away. And punishments are generally not so destructive that it takes away your chance to ever improve, right? It's not so destructive that you suddenly get zapped and you don't exist anymore, right? That's just not the way these punishments work. And God gives us with kindness the opportunity to repent, an opportunity to improve, an opportunity. So it should be as if you go back and uproot the bad action that you did, so that by changing your will, in other words, changing who you are, right, becoming a better person, improving that selfishness or that arrogance or that desire or whatever negative trait it was that led you down the wrong path, you can improve it, you can control it, you can make it better. We have the opportunity to change. This is a very, very important, because so many times today, people in interpersonal relationships, especially, you talk around, he's always going to be that way. Forget it. He's never going to change, but that's not true. I mean, it might be true sometimes, but the person has to, of course, prove that they actually are changing. But people can change, and that's part of how the world is constructed. What are the conditions? How do you know when someone's changing? Number one, he has to admit first the sin, right? The first thing you have to do is admit it, right? You have to recognize it and acknowledge, yes, I did something wrong, right? Something which is very, very rare in public life, especially today, right? The first thing is say, yes, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. I hurt somebody. Umodebo. And he admits it, and then you have to think about it. You can't just admit it and then go on and do the same thing. You have to admit it and say, well, what did I do? Why did I do it? What were the circumstances, right? And then you have to demonstrate that, and you have to return to God. You have to turn, you have to change your direction and show regret. Yes, I made a mistake, and I feel bad that I had made a mistake. I feel bad that I hurt somebody. Charata gemura de meikara, a true regret, one that regrets having had done it in the first place. Not saying, yeah, I regret stealing all the money, but I'm glad that I have $1 million hidden under my basement, and I'll save it away for later, right? Right? But truly regret what happened. Similar to the kind of charata. This is the kind of regret that a halachist would understand what he means, someone that knows Jewish law, and that is if a person makes the rule is, if a person makes a neder, he makes a promise that he's going to do something or he's not going to do something, right? But then he wants to break the promise. Well, you're not allowed to break your promise. But there is a process by which, if you go in front of a rabbi and you tell him that, hey, I made this promise, but I regret it because I didn't really know what I was doing when I made it. Like, had I known A, B, and C, and you demonstrate a true, real regret. So there's a process of uprooting that neder, right? It's like saying, yes, I signed that contract, but that was because I didn't know, a certain fact that I should have known at the time of signing the contract. So and thereby invalidate your signature. I don't know if there's a legal process that can do that or not, but it's probably not an easy process. But that's the point. You have to truly, truly, truly demonstrate that you regret having done what you did before, right? And you have to have true pain in your heart, tsar chazak, a true, strong pain, that it's past. You have to truly wish that you can turn the clock back and stand at the same moment and make a different decision, right? So then, and here's the key thing, and you leave this type of action and behavior for future. So when the opportunity arises in the future to do the same thing, you don't, right? Or the opportunity arises not to do something that you should have done, you do it, right? So then, not only do you leave it, you run away from it, you leave it completely away from your life. Then taking it out of your heart, out of your desire, out of your personality, and you change, right? Then it's as if you uprooted the action that you did in the past. Then God will forgive you, and you will be forgiven, and you'll be able to move on. That your sins will leave and your sins will be forgiven. It is as if the sin has no longer exists. It's uprooted because now you truly are in pain, and you truly regret on what had happened in the previous times. And this is certainly a tremendous kindness in the way the world works. If the world was just a strict place where consequences were immediate, right, and there was no opportunity for improvement, then that would be shuras adin. That would be pure judgment, pure justice. Nonetheless, even though it is a kindness, it is a mercy, right? It is above and beyond what absolute justice would require, right? But it doesn't. But on the other hand, it doesn't contradict the fact that there is still justice, right? Right. This kind of kindness, this kind of chesed, right? Because there is a possibility, right? It is possible to actually change. It is possible that in place of the desire that you had to do the sin in the first place, and the pleasure that you derived from doing that sin, or the benefit, whatever that benefit was, now in place of that, you have regret and you have a pain in your heart for what you did. The length of time is not a way to ignore it and to let the passage of time is not ignoring it, is not saying that God doesn't care, but rather it's a little bit of patience, to give you an opening, to give you an opportunity to fix it, to mend the ways. And similarly, all other ways of kindness. It is like literally that means the son helps acquit his father. In other words, if a person has the opportunity to raise his or her children, or anyone, to improve, to do things better, to do things right that weren't done before. Or mixas nefesh, kuchol nefesh. Part of a life is like a whole life. These are other phrases that have similar meanings. That are scattered throughout the words of the rabbis. Darkei chesedim. These are ways of kindness. To accept a small thing, which is not necessarily, because the action that you did was big, and the process of repentance, the process of changing, is small. At least when you look at it physically, it's an internal process, right? But it's accepted as if you changed the action itself. But it doesn't completely negate, and it doesn't completely contradict the trait of pure justice, right? Because there's legitimate argument to be made for both of them. So the world is this place of balance. It's a place where everything does matter, but we do have the opportunity. There's time and patience for us to work through problems and try to improve upon them. And that's the world that we live in. But I'm almost finished this chapter now. Sheyivatru averot below klum, that God should ignore sins completely with nothing and just let it fly. O shelo yishkach aleim, or that he shouldn't care about them, right? Zehaya neged adin legamri. That would completely contradict true justice. Ki kvar lo haya mishpat v'din amiti b'dvarim, right? Because then there would be no actual true din, true judgment or true law, right? In anything. That you can't find. You can't find a world that there's no consequences to your actions, at least not in this universe, right? We might wish we lived in such a world, but we don't. That's just not the planet we're on, right? Right? And if one of those things that we mentioned when we talked about admitting your sin, regretting your sin, going through the process of repentance, if you're missing any one of those factors, it is certain that the trait of justice will not come empty-handed. It will come and get you. Right? God is long. He has a lot of patience, right? Right, but eventually he collects his debts. Nimsa. It therefore comes out. It therefore results. Right? Anyone, right, who wants to open his eyes, right, there is no way that he can convince himself, right, in such a way that that he shouldn't be careful, to be careful. This is the word zihirut he's using here, the word which is the object of this chapter, is to teach us to be vigilant, to teach us to be careful, right, or watchful, or whatever translation you like, right? Don't think that you don't have to be careful, right? No matter how you look at it, you have to be careful. Tachlit hazirus, with true vigilance. And you have to be careful in its smallest details. All of these approaches that I mentioned, that a person can look at it this way, all of these outlooks, all of these ways to look at things, and you have these strategies, then you can acquire midat hazihirot, the trait of concern, of carefulness, watchfulness, vigilance. Badai, for sure. Imbal nefeshu, if you are a person, literally means a person with a soul, meaning you're a person that cares. So there's a lot of things to talk about before we do the next one, but I want to open the floor in a minute because I'm sure a lot of people have what to say. But just remember the key thing he started with is you have to learn, right? You have to know, you have to have knowledge, you have to know how to live. The second thing, and then he mentioned 3 ways, right? The right way is to be vigilant and be careful because you know and understand the inherent importance of living right? That's the right way to do things. But not everyone can be motivated by that. And I think all of us have times when if we're just not ready to do the right thing because it's right. So then sometimes we think, well, you know what? Well, what is it going to look like? If I do this really nice thing, then they'll give me an honor in the synagogue. They'll give me a prize at the dinner. I'll get a trophy. I'll get a special plaque. So if that motivates you to do the right thing, okay, all right, fine. And then there's the other way. It's think about the consequences, right? Think about the suffering that will eventually come back to you, right? If you do the wrong thing, or think about the good that you could accomplish that will also eventually come back to you. And then if those 3 don't motivate you, then you're toast, right? Yeah. So right. Yeah. So I do want to open the floor now. We got a good 15 minutes left to talk. Rather than the next chapter is pretty short, short relative to this one, but it'll probably still take us a whole week. The next one he talks about the things that are in our lives that keep us away from recognizing these 3 things. The distractors, right? The things that distract us from being careful. The things that make us lose our zihirut, our vigilance. But let's talk about this week's stuff. I'm opening the floor.
So,
I have a question.
Okay, wait, I got a question in-house and then Zoom. Jack,
Okay.
you can go.
Which,
all right, go ahead, Jack.
okay, so, I think it was interesting when you said you look at it differently when you were 14 and 15 than you do now in terms of interpreting this. And I was sort of reflecting on that. To extend it a little bit further, and it's probably a lot of what you've already said. Is it really God, handing out merit badges versus, stepping on your toes? I mean, is that what's really happening and God's just picking at you one way or the other? Or is this something that God set up in terms of the Torah and the way it's defined and the way there's the order of the world, the way we're developed and the way human nature is, that all this happens because of your interactions with human nature and interactions with the world. And these things are really going to happen because God set that all into motion. And if you do certain things, you'll pay for it, not because God's coming down and striking you, but because these are natural events that occur because of your actions that would occur to anyone if they did that in general. I mean, am I putting on my Maimonides hat too much, or is that pretty much?
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I'm saying?
you are putting on a Maimonides hat, and I think underlying the Mesilat Yesharim is that you can read him both ways. I mean, on the surface, he definitely sounds like, right, and he's saying that God is going to slap you in the face if you do something wrong, and God is going to give you a big prize if you do something right. I think, but underlying what he's writing, and I'll tell you what my proof is, right? Because my proof is that, remember, he laid out 3 levels, right? Why is it that the level of the Shlemi Hadas, those that are complete of knowledge, there's no mention of the first level, the one that he really wants us to do, right? Has nothing to do with being punished, nothing to do with what it looks like, nothing to do with getting a plaque on the front wall, right? It all has to do with doing the right thing because you know that it's important to do the right thing, right? So, and I think that the reason why he lays it out that way is because he understands the way people work, right? And we know that so many people are, and even ourselves at different times in our lives, at different stages of our own development, have to think about it in a much more simplistic way, or do, for whatever reason, right? So I think they're both true, and you could read it both ways. And I'm not here. I mean, I know I also lean in the Maimonidean direction, and I admitted that. I'm not sure, you may have logged in like right after I said it, but I admitted that in the beginning, that I'm taking that kind of attack to this.
Yeah.
But you don't have to read it that way. I mean, you can read this book and see the same thing I saw when I was 14, right? When I was truly scared on Rosh Hashanah. I had an image of God with the scale, and I saw him putting the big mitzvos here and big averos there, and little mitzvos here and little averos there, and doing a measurement, and some people think it that way, and there's nothing wrong with necessarily. I just think over time you realize that it doesn't quite work that way. Yeah. But yeah, you are putting on a Maimonidean hat, but it's okay. Anyway, now it's your turn.
Okay, so the very last sentence of the chapter, I thought it was interesting, the translation, the difference in translation. So I have the translator Rabbi Yosef Seabag version.
Okay.
And so my final sentence says, indeed, all these investigations, which, if one considers, will certainly acquire through them the trait of watchfulness, if he is a conscientious person.
Okay.
So my key word there was conscientious person as being the translation, because I feel like that's a huge premise. If he's a conscientious person, it's different, I think, than a person with a soul. So yeah, to me, there are a lot of people who are not conscientious people, and that's a character trait, and it's like an inherent character trait. So I thought it allows for more discussion about the word and the root and the translation.
That's very good. I'm curious to know, because my English translation said a wise soul. What does your English translation say? You have the Kaplan one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
See.
It's literally like the last phrase.
Yeah, it actually is 2 sentences for me. If a man will take all these suggestions to heart, he will surely acquire the trait of watchfulness, period. Let him have the will.
Let him have the will. So a person that has the will to do it. Okay, so that's
weird. It's so
So mine's,
I like that.
yeah. Leslie, which one do you have?
mine says, these are the outlooks and observations by means of which a person will certainly be able to acquire the virtue of vigilance if he aspires to spirituality.
Wow.
Golly.
Oh yeah, that's the same one that you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other translations? Does anyone have? Oh, you have the same one as her. So you see, and what did I say? If I
You said it was a person with a soul.
so I think if I recall correctly, what I said was the literal translation is Baal Nefesh, a person with a soul, right? And I think I added, and if I didn't, correct me, that what I think I added is that someone who cares.
Yeah, you did.
Right.
Say that.
I think that's what I said. So that was my translation. And that dovetails a little with conscientious, right?
It does.
You
Nobody
know.
cares. I agree, but I think that to me is a major statement though, because a lot of people don't care. I mean, I guess that's the whole refinement process that we're talking about. But basically saying all of this is open to a person who cares.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating because it sums up everything. Because he's trying to tell us why we should care,
Mm-hmm.
And he says the best way is we should care simply because it's the right thing, right? That's a shleimi hadas. That's a person who's complete in their soul, in their heart and mind, right? That you don't need to have a reason to care. You understand that's the right thing to do. And then the second level is you should care because of how you look in front of your friends. And the third level is you should care because of the potential consequences, the good or bad. I love that example because it really shows how you can translate things in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
It shows how translation is not just, people when it's not just a simple
word for
thing,
word.
right? Because it doesn't work that way. You can't if you none of the translators translate it literally because that would mean a master of a soul. That just sounds stupid,
I like that though because that almost makes it more along the lines of conscientious because you are mastering your own soul. You're focusing on the right thing to do.
That's true.
So I don't know. I actually like master of the soul. I actually kind of like that.
All right. Well, then you can write your translation. No, I'm kidding. No, yeah.
Years away from that.
Any other questions, comments? We kind of learned a lot tonight. Yeah, I was gonna say just one more little point, and that why is the first path the best path, right? So I was kind of thinking about it. I mean, it seems more mature, right? But more intellectually mature, spiritually mature. But ultimately, if you end up doing the right thing, why does it matter what their motivation is, right? And it seems to be that the Ramchal is arguing that ultimately what matters the most is how you act, right? Not so much the motivation. But he still cares. He still wants the motivation.
Because that very first motivation can't be broken. Consequences can come and go. The repute of other people, who cares? You don't have to care what they think of you. It doesn't matter. But like if you know you're supposed to do the right thing and you do the right thing, like that's bedrock. That's not going anywhere.
Yeah. I have another opinion.
Okay, go ahead.
My opinion is it's because it's kind of a blessing. Like you're doing the right thing because it's the right thing, so you feel good for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to feeling the warmth. You feel the warmth of God as opposed to
the warmth of other people looking at you.
Yeah,
and
you don't
saying
have
that-
or fear.
Yeah.
Any other suggestions?
I kind of think it's a little bit biased because I think that if everybody was on the same page and they were cognizant of the 3 levels and they knew that, okay, the first level is the best level, I think they probably would want to do it. But I think the problem is they're just not oriented that way.
Yeah, some people
So I
have
think
no
it's kind of
conscience and they just do whatever.
Yeah, and how do you orient them that way without consequences?
Well, and how do you,
That's
I mean,
why
like,
I-
I'm very naive when it comes to people. I'll just take them at face value or whatever. So, like, how do you know to kind of like steer clear of those people? Because I want to believe the best in everybody. So that's a challenge for me personally.
Yeah. Anybody online? Yosef, you have something? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that maybe both approaches are right. Like we start with your as younger adults or children because we need to have more clear boundaries, and then we go to Ahava and we learn that yes, there are consequences, but they're not as scary as they were when we were children. So,
All right.
and
Yeah.
just
So,
suggesting that.
yeah, process of development.
Mm.
I tell you what I wrote was I wrote my scribble thing was maybe because the other 2 paths aren't always observable, which is similar to what you were saying, because like you don't necessarily always see the consequences, but yeah. Any other ideas?
Well, one thing I want to add, and this isn't part of what was even discussed, But I'm thinking in terms of the health consequences of doing the right thing versus not. I mean, if you do the right thing, you know, you're emotionally better, you're physically better, you really function better. And I would even stretch it to say, I wonder if there's a relationship with longevity and people that do the right thing and lead a good life, as opposed to those that have a stressful, negative life. So I just mentioned that just to bring it up, and it might be an interesting conversation down the road that we could have, you and I. But
Yeah.
I really think that's real. You know, people who are just at peace with themselves, and you know them, and they tend to be healthy and happy and functional. You know, and so that's just something to think about. I mean, that's just something I've observed, but that doesn't mean it necessarily is true. I don't know, there's any data on that. But I'd like
There
to discuss.
might be data on
It's
that.
the gratitude resilience bond, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it definitely in mental health that it plays a part.
Yeah.
All right, so I think first of all, I'm lucky that my battery lasted on my laptop the whole time because I forgot to bring my charger, but it was fully charged and it made it all the way through. And so the next one will be in 2 weeks. So I guess that means July 29th, Tuesday, July 29th. Okay. So thank you very much for coming online and those that are here. And thanks to Deanna for hosting. And Leslie, I'll remind me, send me a text message. I'll put you in that group so you'll know the location. So, and the same thing, Jack, if you want, you also live in this area, you can join us too in person if you want, or whatever works better for you.
Okay,
All
that's, if I finish at work early enough, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, it's all good. All right. Anyway, all right. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.